everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I, of course, am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am doing another discography ranking, but this time it's going to be a little bit different. Instead of doing a tier list like I normally would have done, I decided to change up the format a little bit for this video, just to try out things out. I think I might start doing this in the future from now on. Instead of doing a tier list like I normally do, I'm going to be ranking all these albums from my least favorite to my favorite. And the band that I'm ranking today in question is none other than one of my favorite bands, a very influential band, one of the most important metal bands of the 90s, Neurosis. I've been a longtime fan of this band for a few years now at this point. I love a good chunk of their albums, so this ranking was difficult to do because I love so many of these albums. And without further ado, enough of my ramblings. Let's just start off my list. Alright, so, quick disclaimer, we are only going to be covering their full-length studio albums, so we're not covering, like, the Sovereign EP or any of their other EPs. We're also not counting the collaboration album they did with Yarbo, Neurosis and Yarbo, where we're not including that because that's more of a collaboration album. It's kind of a half and half. It's not really a Neurosis album, so we're not counting that. We're only going over their 11 studio full-length albums. At number 11 is their 1990 album, The Word as Law. Now, this is their second album. This was their first album featuring guitarist Steve Von Till, so this was the kind of the start of the lineup that we all kind of know and love of Neurosis, with Scott Kelly, Steve Von Till, Jason Roeder, and Dave Edwardson. A few things to note: this is the shortest album in their catalog. This clocks in at 37 minutes and 21 seconds. It's a mere 8 seconds shorter than their first album, Pain of Mind, which we'll get to later. And this is kind of the transitionary album. So Neurosis, before they became Neurosis, they were kind of a hardcore crust punk band. And this album is kind of the halfway point between the early hardcore stuff and the later atmospheric sludge / post-metal stuff that Neurosis would become very famous for. But to me, this is just kind of a very rough transitionary album. Overall, it is slower than the first album, which again, we'll get to. But it also does feature their shortest song, Insensitivity, which is a mere 46 seconds long. That sounds alright. There's some really cool bass work on this album, and there's some decent riffs. But overall, like I said, this is just kind of a rough transitionary album. You know, this is the sound of a band that's still very much trying to get their feet under them. They're trying to find a different sound. They still have not found it yet. So overall, it's not a bad album, but to me, it's not the Neurosis that I know and love. This isn't an album I'm going to return to if I want Neurosis. And like I said, it's the transitionary album. It's basically the link between the first era of Neurosis and the second era of Neurosis, and overall, it's just not that good in my opinion. But again, it's not terrible. There's some decent songs. So yeah, but that's my number 11 pick. My least favorite Neurosis album is The Word as Law. Alright, moving on to my number 10 pick. It is their 1987 debut album, Pain of Mind. Now, this album is pretty much nothing like... this album is nothing like the Neurosis we would get in the future. This is just a straight-up hardcore crust punk album. It's very just aggressive. The songs are fairly short. I don't think there's a single song here that's more than 5 minutes long. And the reason I ranked it higher than Word as Law is because I feel like this album is just more cohesive than Word as Law. This is just a straight up hardcore crust punk album. There's no real sludgy moments. It's not really metal. It's just straight up kind of hardcore. And for the style that it is, it's not bad, but again, this is not Neurosis to me. This sounds like a completely different band. You know, it's not as, like, kind of messy. It's not as rough as The Word as Law. It's, like I said, it's much more cohesive. I've said this before on multiple channels. I'm just not really big into punk, so I really don't get into a lot of, like, crust punk and hardcore. So this album really doesn't do a whole lot for me. Again, there's a couple decent tunes, but overall, again, it's not the Neurosis that I know. This isn't an album I'm going to play if I want Neurosis. Again, as a hardcore album, I'm sure it's not bad. I'm sure some people who watch this channel who are more into hardcore can tell me if this album is kind of good or not. But again, just not not an album I'm going to jam super often, so that's the reason it lands at number 10 for me. I like it more than The Word is Law, but to me, their Word is Law and Pain of Mind are both pretty much interchangeable, so, you know how it is. Alright, moving on to number 9 is their their latest album, Fires Within Fires, which came out in 2016. This, of course, is their final album with Scott Kelly. They would part ways with him in 2019 after it was outed that Scott Kelly was outed as a domestic abuser, which ugly, of course. This is also their shortest album since Word is Law. This bad boy clocks in at a mere 40 minutes when, if I'm not mistaken, every other album in their catalog clocks in at over an hour. And to be honest, this to me is just kind of just kind of paint by numbers, like very just kind of Neurosis, doing Neurosis, but not really in a way that's like super intriguing or super interesting. This album does kind of sound, I don't want to say the word uninspired, but it does kind of sound a bit like uninspired. Like they're not really, they're not like, their heart really isn't fully into it. The songs just aren't as memorable on this album. I mean, there are still some decent songs on here. Like Bending Light is a pretty good song. That's the opening track. Is pretty good. Broken Ground is also a decent song. But again, this album to me is just kind of paint by numbers. It's very meat and potatoes, kind of just Neurosis doing Neurosis, and not really. It feels like maybe their heart wasn't fully 100% into this album. Which does suck, because, I mean, there is a possibility that this could be the last Neurosis album, because it's been a while since they've done anything. And if this is the note they go out on, that's a bit disappointing, but, I mean, I like it more than Pain of Mind or Word is Law, but, and it's a decent album again, but it's far from my favorite, which is why it lands at number 9 for me. Alright, number 8 now is Honor Found in Decay in 2012. Now, this to me is kind of similar to Fires Within Fires a lot of ways. Like, I kind of have the same gripe with it, where it just feels very paint by numbers, where it just feels like kind of a very bare bones, very kind of basic Neurosis album. There are some good tracks on this album, like At the Well, I think, is a really good song. My Heart for Deliverance is pretty good. Bleeding the Pigs. The standout songs are pretty memorable. The songs that don't really stand out aren't memorable really at all. Again, this isn't a bad album by any means to me. It's just kind of very basic. It's just Neurosis. It's a very meat and potatoes Neurosis album. They're really not kind of doing a whole lot with it. They're not really incorporating kind of different elements like they would on their previous albums. They're just like, again, just putting out a Neurosis album. And I mean, if you like Neurosis, you're gonna like this album. So, and I mean, but overall, this it's lower on my list. I put it at number 8 because I just think they have way better albums than this, and we're gonna get to those. All right, my number 7 choice is Given to the Rising, released in 2007. Now this album has kind of, I definitely like it more than Fires Within Fires or Honor Found in Decay, but overall it's far from my favorite, which is why it's at number 7. But this is a pretty good album. There's lots of great tracks on it. Like, I think the title track is really good. Fear and Sickness. To the Wind is like one of the best Neurosis songs in my opinion. Water is Not Enough. There's a lot of like kind of cool blends of like folk elements and like industrial elements on this album. And this is definitely a heavier album than the one that came before, which we'll get to, but I don't necessarily think it's like a better album. Overall, it definitely does sound more inspired than Honor Found in Decay or Fires Within Fires. And overall, this is a very enjoyable album, and I would happily jam it again. But, this was a difficult discography to rank, I'm going to say it, because Neurosis, they're very consistent, and each album kind of has its own unique feel, at least up to a certain point. And I love, like, most of these albums, so it really was difficult to kind of give this to rank this discography. It was very difficult. So yeah, but Given to the Rising, great album, lots of great songs, but for me, it lands at number 7. Alright, number 6 is The Eye of Every Storm, which released in 2004. This was the album that came out before Given to the Rising, and Given to the Rising is definitely a heavier album than Eye of Every Storm, but I like Eye of Every Storm a little bit more. Even though it's not a particularly heavy album, I feel like on this album they kind of tried more of a post-rock type sound rather than a post-metal sound that they're usually known for. But it didn't feel like they were, trying to be like more commercially accessible or anything. It just has a bit of a lighter sound. And I say lighter, like lighter, because this album still feels, it's very just kind of desperate. It's very just kind of bleak and hopeless sounding album. It's just very kind of depressive. Just, this is like kind of the sound of like someone who's just utterly lost and like trying to find their way. And a lot of the lyrics kind of reflect that. They're very introspective. And some of my favorite Neurosis songs are on this album. Like, the title track is one of my favorite Neurosis songs. I absolutely love it. No River to Take Me Home is an awesome song. Left to Wander, A Season in the Sky, Bridges is a really good song. Yeah, so while this isn't their heaviest album, this actually is definitely one of their least heavy albums. I just think it's still a very, very good album. I just liked the very kind of desperate, helpless feel that this album gives. I like, the very introspective type lyrics, and overall, it's still a very enjoyable album. It's just, sometimes you gotta put numbers to things, which is why for me it lands at number 6. Alright, moving on now to number 5. My number 5 album, this is my favorite album of theirs that they released post 1990s. It's A Sun That Never Sets. This album came out in 2001. This is kind of the first album where they kind of just started to embrace a lot of like folk elements, and I think they blend those folk elements very well with their post metal, sludge metal sound. And it's got great production. I really like the way everything sounds on this album. It all sounds really good. There's some of their best songs that they've ever written, in my opinion, are on this album. Like Stones from the Sky is probably a top 5 favorite Neurosis song for me. The title track is incredible. From the Hill, The Tide. Yeah, there's so many great songs on this album. Overall, I definitely don't like it as much as the 4 albums that came before, which we're going to get to, because at this point, like, with the 4 after this, it's pretty much like 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D, because I like them, I love them all pretty much equally, but again, you have to assign numbers to things, which is extremely difficult, so, But yeah, number 5, A Sun That Never Sets, is an excellent album. I do really, really love it. I would happily jam it again. It's not as heavy as like some of their later material. It's maybe a bit more, I shouldn't say accessible, but it's not as like, it's not as heavy or as dense of a listen. Like, it doesn't take as much out of you as some of their other albums do. So yeah, I would happily jam it over and over again. But yeah, lands at number 5, even though I do love it, Sun That Never Sets. Alright, number 4 is Times of Grace, released in 1999. One thing to note about this album that I think is pretty interesting, this album was produced by the recently deceased Steve Albini, of course from Big Black and myriad of other projects, rest in peace. And this was the first of many Neurosis Steve Albini collaborations. And on this album, they kind of arguably started to embrace more of a progressive type sound. Which, with the albums before this, structure was really never kind of the focus of the previous Neurosis albums, I don't think, but on Times of Grace, the sonnet structure became much more intricate and much more kind of complex. There was much more kind of noticeable rhythms and even kind of hooks at points. But it's still a very heavy album. It's still got all the Neurosis trademarks. It's just that big, heavy, monolithic, just droning sound that is just bone-crushingly heavy, and there's some really awesome songs on here, like The Doorway, Under the Surface, The Last You'll Know, End of the Harvest is probably my favorite song on here, and the title track is really awesome as well. Yeah, I do really love this album. This is, like I said, it's like 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D for these next 4. I do really love this album. There is so many great songs on here, and again, it's just very heavy. It's the kind of more intricate song structures definitely make this album stand out a lot more in their catalog, and which I appreciate. And yeah, number 4, Times of Grace. I love this album, and yeah, you know, you just gotta assign numbers to things. It's difficult ranking bands. It's difficult ranking bands like this that are just consistently awesome. I guess I should rank more bands that have shitty albums, eh? What do you think? You guys want that? Yeah, you guys want me to rank bands that have more shitty albums? Well, if you want, I can. All right, now we're entering the top 3. My number 3 album is Souls at Zero, released in 1992, and this is the first traditional Neurosis sounding album. Like this is the album that came out after, you know, Pain of Mind and Word is Law. Gone are the hardcore crust punk sound. It's still the hardcore sound is still kind of here in parts, but it's kind of more of a post hardcore, post punk type sound rather than just like straight up hardcore. They embraced a lot more doomy riffs, a lot more kind of different experimentation. This isn't a perfect album. There's some rough transitions, but like between songs, and they have like kind of like an instrumental, an acoustic break into, and then it gets heavy again. Sometimes the transitions are a little rough, but that's a very minor gripe because the songs on this album are just amazing. Frankly, I love pretty much every song on this album. I love the atmosphere of this album. It's very cold, and again, it's very, very heavy. It's just this. It's a word. I'm reading just other kind of like reviews and stuff of Neurosis albums. A word that gets brought up a lot is the word ancient, and that makes sense because these albums, a lot of them have a very just ancient sound, like you discovered some ancient artifact that was lost in the ice for thousands of years, and it's doing things to you that you don't want to happen. And if you keep staring at it, your eyes are going to explode or whatever. But yeah, some of their best songs they've ever written are easily on this album. To Crawl Under One's Skin is an amazing song. The title track, The Web, is one of their shorter songs, but I do really love it. It's got a great riff. Sterile Vision, A Chronology for Survival, Takanaze, Takane's, however you say that one. I love that song. Yeah, I like the production of the sound. The bass is just meaty. The guitars are maybe a little thin, but I think they sound great. The drums sound awesome. And yeah, overall, I do really love this album. I will continue to love this album probably for the rest of my life. So yeah, number 3, Souls at Zero. Absolutely love this album. All right, coming in at number 2 is Enemy of the Sun, released in 1993. Only 1 year between Souls at Zero and Enemy of the Sun. You think the quality would dip in between that time, but no, for me, they just got better. But yeah, Enemy of the Sun, this album, this album just feels otherworldly, frankly. Again, the word ancient comes to mind. Monolithic. That's the way to describe this album. It's monolithic. It's very heavy. It's just droning and big, and it just is crushing. It's very just kind of, at the same time, it's very emotionally charged. It's very atmospheric. And there are some really amazing songs on here, like the two opening tracks, Lost and Raised the Stray, are, again, probably 2 of my top 5 Neurosis songs. I absolutely love those 2 songs in particular. Cold Ascending is an amazing song. Lexicon, the title track, is really good as well. The Time of the Beasts. This is also their longest album. This album clocks in at 1 hour and 12 minutes, but it does not drag at all. It honestly, you don't even like pay attention to the time when you're listening to this album. It just goes by because it flows so well, and even though it's very slow and it's very, again, monolithic, it's still, to me, a very engaging experience. I think the production improved from Souls at Zero. The bass is absolutely meaty. The drums sound great. The guitars are beefy and heavy. And yeah, overall, I do absolutely adore this album. This, to me, like, kind of is, in a lot of ways, the perfect Neurosis album, save for the one that came out after this, which we'll get to that one. But yeah, this, again, Enemy of the Sun, this is just a perfect album in my opinion. I have no gripes with this album whatsoever. The final track is an instrument. Cleanse is an instrumental. And it's pretty long, but I don't know. I found that also pretty engaging. Weirdly, it's kind of cool tribal drumming, and I don't know. I kind of liked it. I don't know if many people would be big on that song, but I don't know. I like it. I thought it was cool. Alright, and now number one. It's none other than Through Silver in Blood, released in 1996. Now, this was the first album to feature keyboardist slash samplist dude Noah Landis. So this is pretty much the Neurosis lineup that we all know and love. Scott, Steve, Dave, Jason, and Noah. The five horsemen of the apocalypse, I guess. But yeah, this is one of my top 10 favorite metal albums of all time. I believe I put it at number 9 on my top 50 favorite metal albums list. I absolutely love this album. Again, it's very long. Like, most of the tracks on this album are over 10 minutes, but they're extremely well paced. I never get bored hearing this album. I never get bored hearing any of the songs on it. This has like one of my favorite bass tones in all music. It's so disgustingly just freaking heavy. This entire album is just very cold. It's very dark. It's very grim, and I just love the atmosphere. I love all the instrumentation. I love all the samples and like the kind of the industrial influences they bring on this album. The title track, which is the opening track, is an amazing song. I is incredible. Purify, Locust Star, which is probably maybe their biggest hit. I'm not sure. I feel like that was the song. That song was my introduction to this band, so I think it is definitely one of their bigger hits for sure. Not that this band had many hits per se, but Ion or Eon is an absolutely beautiful song, and I really love Strength of Fates, Enclosure in Flame. I've just pretty much named off every song except for the two interludes. Normally I complain about interludes, but I feel like the interludes really work here to add to the atmosphere. They're just weird kind of samples that are, they're kind of just creepy, and they just really add to the whole atmosphere and vibe of this album. This is just an absolutely incredible album. This is the album that definitely kind of put Neurosis on the map. And yeah, I absolutely adore this album. This is one of my top 10 favorite metal albums of all time. Probably in my top 10 favorite albums of all time, period. And yeah, I just adore this album. If you have not heard this album, if you have not heard this band before, go and jam this album in particular. This is kind of the perfect, well, Souls at Zero and this album are kind of the perfect introduction to this band. They'll give you everything that this band is all about. So yeah, that's my number one, Through Silver and Blood, released in 1996. And that about does it. So yeah, ranking this discography was extremely difficult just because there's so many albums here that I just absolutely love. I absolutely adore this band. This is probably one of my top 10 favorite all-time bands in general. And yeah, but this was a lot of fun. I loved revisiting all these albums. Well, most of them anyway. And yeah, that about does it. If you enjoyed this video, do consider leaving a like. If you made it to the end of this video, I appreciate you and you're awesome. Leave a comment down below. Tell me, what do you think about these albums? What do you think about, this band? How would you rank these albums? And tell me if you like the new format or not, because I'm thinking of just switching from discography tier list to outright just ranking my favorite albums from least favorite to most favorite. I think I might do that more. Let me know if you guys like that change or not. And, well, yeah, that about does it. Consider subscribing because I have more content coming your way. Of course, I'm just another heavy metal maniac. I will see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you take care and have a great day. So long.